Welcome back to our interview with Senator Mark Warner of Virginia, chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence. And so it sounds like then that the legislative challenge is to enable this and maybe even encourage it, but yet create the right kinds of guardrails such that you don't stifle the whole thing, because it will find its own water level one way or the other.
But here is what I live in fear of is, let's go back to the 2009 timeframe. And I'm not saying that, social media companies weren't already prevalent, but we had this time where you had the normal Republican, let's trust business. And we had during the particularly early days of the techno-optimists, we had this, and, I think the Obama administration had a lot of techno-optimists, they were saying, okay, this is so cool, what's going on in the Valley. So we bought in as a country, and frankly, the whole world bought into saying, okay, Silicon Valley, you guys are really smart. You go break things, and we got to innovate as fast as we can, and we'll come in after the fact and put the guardrails. Well, they innovated. They broke things. We saw at the Judiciary Committee hearing just this week, a small sampling of the number of families who've had literally their kids die in many cases due to the fact that we were never able to come back with social media and say, all right, we're going to put in guardrails after the fact. So we are living that same experience real time right now. So when Schumer had the first hearing and we had, all of the big names in the tech field all sit there, when they all, and there was a question asked, how many of you think AI needs to be regulated? They all raised their hands. Having been in this mix for a long time, that gave me no confidence, because it's really easy to say, I want regulation until you show me specific language. And what I'm already hearing from the beginning, when there was this real fear of how this can mess with our lives, where, gosh, we got to regulate something. The tech community, and listen, I came from the tech community. I am not overly harassing them, but I think I am realistic about how they look at things. Their immediate answer is, yeah, we need regulation, but we don't want to slow down innovation. We don't want to be like Europe. We don't want to be like, other nation states. Well, China's being still pretty innovative, and they've actually got a pretty good set of domestic rules for AI. Now, I don't think they would apply those rules on an international usage if they needed that for a security issue. And the reason why I'm more afraid of not getting some guardrails right for AI, even than social media, is that AI, the one of the transformative aspects of AI is it can accomplish things at a speed and scale unlike anything we've seen in the past. So the ability, for example, if we go back to deep fakes and fake voices of political candidates, you don't have to be that sophisticated to do that at a scale where, you could literally, with a relatively low amount of investment, if you'd spend a little time recording every member of Congress, somebody could have, with an overnight flick of the switch, if you built your program, your AI tool the right way, suddenly have every member of Congress's face pop up, with a voice that sounds exactly like he or she, saying completely wacky things. Now, we say wacky things enough on our own, but to have an AI deep fake out there doing it at scale, and us saying, well, we didn't innovate in time. There are these voluntary efforts. We go back to the EO. That was one thing. There's going to be a group that I'm working with. We have over half the world goes to an election this year. There's a group, some of the tech companies that I'm working with, to say, can we at least get a set of voluntary guidelines for AI misuse in elections, not just in our nation, but in elections around the world. So it will probably be a little bit of both voluntary efforts, but hopefully then some guardrails that have some force of law.
All right. So yes, AI is a step function or exponential increase in capability at speed, but we've been talking about a very linear analog function, which is getting agreement on legislative language. And to go back to your low-hanging fruit example earlier on, simply codifying, what is in the executive order from the Biden administration for federal agencies, maybe codifying for agencies the NIST framework when it comes out and is complete. I mean, that's never happened, I don't even think, with the NIST cybersecurity guidance in all these years. So, I mean, how would you handicap the chances of anything happening given everything else?
It's like it's early in the new year. I want to be optimistic. Um, what I hope we don't have to have happen is some tragic manipulation of the market or some gross interference in one of the primary elections before we have to say, after the fact, we have to rush to do something. I feel a little bit, I thought I had the sweet spot where, because a lot of the problems are the same, messing in elections and messing in public markets. Could we then build an alliance of the capitalists with the small d Democrats? And I've got bills in this area, but I don't feel like I've hit the sweet spot yet. And particularly from the markets, I thought they'd be all over this, because it wouldn't take, and I wouldn't, if I was going to be a bad guy using AI tools, I wouldn't mess with Fortune 50 companies, but Fortune 200 to 500 companies that have got enough of a public float. I wouldn't be shocked if we found out that that's going on right now, but we just don't know. But I've been remarkably surprised that there's been not more of a rallying to the cause around the markets, the banks and others who I think realize this is a concern. So am I optimistic? I think that the Jerry Moran and my bill around NIST standards codification has a good chance. I do think around the national security gambit, particularly some of that has a good chance. But and there are these efforts. I mentioned Senator Schatz's bill about mandatory watermarking. Although I do think you have to include with that an additional penalty for groups that would try to remove the watermarking, which has happened repeatedly. I mean, the best example of that is, if you have a CD and you're trying to copy it to something else, oftentimes there is a built-in tool to not allow you to copy it. Well, there are other firms out there that say, how do I take that protection away? Well, and so there are already laws in copyright that we could bring over to AI. But those are some of the areas.
Yeah, just to make an analogy, the Congress got in its report from the taxpayer advocate 66 legislative recommendations. Some of them, might take some real cogitation. Probably 60 of them are just technical fixes to little items in the tax code that would resolve. They're not even philosophical questions or tax policy questions. They're just simply fixes. And that's unlikely to happen. It could be all done in one bill, of 3 pages or something. So it's just, I don't know what it takes. And do you know what it takes to get some?
Well, I don't want to sound jaded here, but I have thought about the fact that as we think about the gaps on the EO, could you put in something that was simply a technical fix that maybe didn't get a lot of attention, but that would then give you some of the, again, not be as broad, but at least, because the ideas in the EO are pretty darn good, but give them a little more force of law. Probably won't be able to do that. I'm going to still work in these areas around markets, elections, around national security, around this notion of watermarking / and then protecting whatever kind of entity that identifies a product, a song, a face, a voice as AI manipulated, to make sure that if people do that, those protections are not removed. I think there is some bipartisan support there.
And you do have agency partners on a lot of those, even if it's only the tiny Election Assistance Commission, for example, or the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office, for example. Besides the scientific agencies, you do have those types of policy agencies in those domains that could be vehicles for some of this happening.
And yes, I agree with that. And one of the things that, if I could wave my magic wand, would be to try to, have some ability to, go to the federal workforce and go to all of the component parts and say, all right, you're now sitting in my job. What do you think ought to be short-term or long-term rules of the road around AI? And if we could kind of almost have that kind of a competition and have that data then, or those suggestions then maybe not sorted by individual agency or individual committee. But this is where, this debate we started way back, do you put all your AI expertise in a single regulatory entity? Or do you, because you realize it's moving so quickly that individual agencies can't keep up, and to try to attract that talent cost money and time and prestige? I don't think we're going to be able to do it. I think we're going to default to this AI by department, but it would be great if we still had, whether OSTP, I know they've been doing a lot of good work on AI. Arthi Prabhakar there has been, but I still think even if we had an input of ideas from the federal government, having some central place to kind of sort through those with the most cutting edge AI knowledge would be helpful to the process.
Well, it's been great having you with us. Senator Mark Warner of Virginia is chairman of the Select Committee on Intelligence. I'm Tom Temin. You're watching Federal News Network. Let's go back to the studio now for more on the AI and data exchange.